Hello, internet. How's it going? Happy Friday to you. Hopefully, you're doing well. Just getting this last tweet out before we get going, but hopefully, you've had a good week. And yeah, hopefully, everything is going well. It is going good. Started the week off wet here in San Diego and ended it dry. So that's good because I have a leak in the roof. So weather is not good. Yeah. Let's see. All right. So what's going on today? Um, so we've been working on Redwood stuff, and here at Zeal we're focusing on Redwood. Oh no, you remember we had a relief nerve. Hey, how's it going, Core Bob? Luckily, the leak's in the garage, so we're able to just put buckets under it. But yeah, it sucks, and we're gonna get that handled by because it was caused by the leaks are caused by the solar company, by the panels. But yeah, so they're gonna be coming by at the beginning of next month, unfortunately. But I don't think we have any rain scheduled for the next 2 weeks, so hopefully you're doing well, Core Bob. So I was saying before, so we were starting to look at Redwood, and we were looking into integrating last stream OAuth into Redwood, or into the Zeal Redwood template application. We cloned it, and we were trying to see like what it takes to integrate it in, and it was fairly involved because we were like having to do a bunch of workaround, like incorporate a bunch of workarounds. We just had barely gotten some of the front end JavaScript stuff like implemented from using it. But in that between then and now, the Redwood team has released 4.0 release candidate. So I thought that we'd take some time and take a look at the release candidate and spend the next hour taking a look at it, reading what the details are, and maybe even getting to a little bit of coding with it. So, or see where we end up, because there is a change in there that is interesting. So, I personally never schedule rain, but the weather forecasts do seem to look at my schedule. True. You can never truly schedule rain, but yeah. All right, so let's take a look. Let's do this, and we'll do this, and then we'll move this over here so we can better see it. And let's just close this, and let's increase the font a little bit. So the Redwood announcement is located on their forums, on their discourse, not Discord, discourse. So you can get the URL right there. I'll just keep it on there for like another minute or so. So yeah, so Redwood version 4.0 release candidate now available. And so today we're announcing Redwood 4.0 release candidate with me. This major was all about auth. So this is why we're taking a look at this, by the way, because I knew that because the Redwood team had mentioned that they were reworking auth before. So the stuff we were doing with trying to integrate OAuth into our application might be throwaway. Well, it's going to be throwaway work because now they're going to have a new auth system in there. So I think but let's just keep on reading and go through it all. So we've gone to great lengths to completely decouple auth from the framework so that you can use any auth provider you want and don't have to wait for us to support it. We also bumped Node.js versions Redwood supports. Redwood used to support 14 and 16, and the API side would build for 14. Now it supports 16 and 18, and the API side builds for 16. Lastly, we made some improvements to the GraphQL server, bumping the version of GraphQL Yoga to v3 and adding GraphQL Armor. So if y'all remember last month, around the time of last month, November, last year, let's just say last year. Let me get some music playing in the background. Okay. I was working on doing a contribution for GraphQL Armor. So this is that related work. What had ended up happening is one of the core team members ended up taking the PR and running with it and doing even more with it. So my work wasn't directly committed, wasn't directly merged. Instead, they spun off. Instead, one of the core members took it and ran with it and built and did more with it, more than I did. So that is what is going on with that. And then let's see if we can deal with this. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, so that's what that work was. They ran with it and they did a lot more with it. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. So yeah, GraphQL Armor is a plugin for Yoga, for GraphQL Yoga, and I think for like one or two other like GraphQL frame libraries that add security in there. So we'll deep dive in this. We'll review what GraphQL Armor is giving for us and all that type of stuff. So let's take a look. So let's just dive in and take a look at what's going on. All right, so the highlights is decoupled auth, node upgrade, Yoga, and Armor. So decoupled auth, I want to use Amazon Cognito, key cloak. Now you don't have to wait, you just have to set it up. Redwood has new auth API you can use to integrate your auth provider of choice as if it was official. It's the same API our official integrations use. Check out the new and improved custom auth doc for a step-by-step guide. So we'll just open that up in a new tab in the meantime. There's a niche decoupling feature where here worth mentioning. Normally the website gets the current user from the GraphQL API, but if you don't use Redwood's GraphQL API for whatever reason, you can get that from somewhere else. Or somewhere else, wherever you want. So it just the current user, so if you spent a little bit of time looking at RedwoodJS and were curious about looking at auth, and you jumped into the forums, you would notice that you would see that a lot of people were asking questions for auth providers because it wasn't easy to add your own auth provider. Like, so if you wanted to do OAuth or other integrations, there was auth for certain things built in, like regular username and password, and then Auth0 and a couple other providers, but it was like built into the core of the application. So you had to do a PR. You couldn't just easily extend the feature set. You would have to you would have to make a PR in order to add in the provider. So they saw that, I guess, based off, a lot of people asking the questions and wanting to do this, they saw that, yeah, we need to decouple the auth provider from RedwoodJS. And so they separated it out, and that was the main core thing, like they called out here in the new version 4. All right, so no JS upgrades because 14 is in maintenance mode. So just trying to, keep on supporting the latest and greatest, trying to keep ahead of the curve. So GraphQL Yoga v3. So GraphQL Yoga, let's just read this through first. The Guild recently released a new major version of GraphQL Yoga, and we've included it in this major. The most salient user-facing change is the brand new graphical interface. Yeah, the new graphical interface is like really nice. So really nice. Most of the changes were framework facing instead of user, but there are a few things to look out for that we'll highlight in the upgrade guide below. For the full list of changes in Yoga v3, check out the guild's blog. So the guild is the people that maintain the GraphQL Yoga. So GraphQL Yoga is the framework that RedwoodJS uses to drive the GraphQL API and all that type of stuff. So that's what's being used under the hood. It's not just a raw implementation of GraphQL. Redwood is using very popular libraries, and so that's what this is just doing. It's just upgrading it. So nothing huge, groundbreaking. All right, so here's the new big one that I helped a little bit contribute to. So just by upgrading to v4, your GraphQL API got more secure by default. V4 features escapes GraphQL Armor, a middleware that adds a security layer to your GraphQL endpoint. GraphQL Armor implements a suite of security best practices protecting your endpoint from abuse of aliases, depth directives, tokens, and more. Check out the new GraphQL Armor section in the docs. All right, so we'll open that up and we'll take a look at what the docs look like. And then here is the upgrade guide. So although there's a major change, there's smaller scope than last one. Auth is a big part of it. Let's go over the changes. So let's see. So yeah, they decoupled the auth. They've removed the built-in providers, Ethereum, GoTrue, Okta, and Host. So these built-in providers are now removed. And then they do a call out that removing these, are you upset? You can raise your concerns because this is only a release candidate. So because I guess since this is being removed, you will have to implement the custom auth provider, and like other type of providers with other authentication libraries, usually there's a community that will create packages that you can install that would directly integrate. So I'm pretty sure that's what we'll end up seeing. Yeah, here we go. So if you want to continue using one of these auth providers, you have to set it up yourself via custom auth to show you exactly how. We've updated the custom auth doc with step-by-step instructions using the end host as an example. If you were using end host, your job just got simpler. Yeah, so you're gonna have to reinvent the wheel with this update. So if you want to integrate with Okta, you're gonna have to figure out how to do that. So a lot of these auth providers use the same type of authentication flows. So usually it is replacing URLs to their authentication endpoints and then updating certain things about payloads to fetch the token and the authentication stuff when doing those auth stuff. So most of the time it's fairly straightforward, but I'd be curious to see. All right, so API changes. The rest of the changes are architectural. That is, we didn't remove any functionality from the use auth hook or anything like that. Just move things around. The most tedious change on your end will probably be changing where use auth hook gets imported from. It's no longer from RedwoodJS auth, but from source auth. And probably that's because it's decoupled, right? It's no longer built into RedwoodJS. Now it is source code in your application proper. So you can expose it and edit it. So auth, I'll make more sense in a second. So after we go through all the changes, let's use auth 0 as an example, but follow along even if you're not using auth 0. The steps here should apply to any auth provider. First, make sure your Git index is clean, then upgrade to the release candidate. So we're just doing a version upgrade here. To make this process less manual, we recommend rerunning the original setup command you used to set up auth in the first place. Interesting. So this is probably so it regenerates all the source files, right? Because no longer is it inside of No longer is it inside of the RedwoodJS library. It's external, so you set up auth and it'll generate the files. So okay, so let's take a look. So okay, let's look at the web API changes one at a time. On the website, you should notice a brand new file, source auth. Just this is where all the action happens. Previously, all the action happened in app source at. So this, yeah, I remember so last Friday when we were editing things, we were in this file, kind of like tweaking the flow, like overwriting certain things and tweaking the flow. There, your auth provider's client SDK was instantiated and passed to the auth provider component like so. So yeah, so we had this auth client, and then we had this auth provider, and then like we would pass the auth provider to the auth client to the auth provider. Now things are different. It all happens within the source auth. So now we have this create auth hook now for auth0 web. And then so we're still creating the client, and then we have this hook that generates the provider and use auth. Notice that auth provider component and use auth hook aren't things you import from RedwoodJS auth anymore, but things returned by a function called create auth imported from a new package that the setup command installed for you. Just auth. This function takes an instance of the auth provider similar to client SDK and maps and methods. So yeah, so this is a separate library that they created for auth0 specifically. Let's see. So you're probably gonna have to create this yourself for other authentication clients. This function takes an instance of your auth provider's client SDK. Yeah, since we've decoupled auth from the framework, the router doesn't automatically pick this up anymore. You have to tell it about the integrations by passing it use auth hook you just created. So use auth. So this is the file. We create this use auth hook that generates everything. Well, that's what we're exporting, and then we use that. Similarly, in the app.js, Redwood Apollo provider needs the use auth hook to get a token to include in every GraphQL request. So we have to pass it the use auth hook so that it could use that auth provider to get the token like it just called out. So there's a good chance the logic for instantiating your auth provider's client SDK is still here in app.js because you needed to pass it to the old version of the auth provider. We don't need it in two places. Go ahead and remove it. That's all for the website. Well, almost. If you're really using auth, you're probably using use auth in some of your components. You'll have to change the import from RedwoodJS auth to source auth, yeah. But that should be easy enough with a simple search and replace. But now, unless you're using custom auth, there shouldn't be any references to RedwoodJS auth anymore. Go ahead and remove it from your website's package JSON and update your project's URL log by installing. There's not much to the API side. The only decoupling we had to do here was with the auth decoder, which in auth0's case decodes the JWT in the authorization request header. Now you pass it to the GraphQL server instead of it being implied. This gives you control of how the token is decoded. Okay. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, there's no more magic happening. It's a little bit more bare metal, at least in terms of like what the decoder is. It's still a little magical just because there's already this auth0 provider, authentication provider, that's doing stuff for us. But you should be able to, I'm thinking you should be able to emulate this for other auth providers. Okay, that wasn't too much. Here's a summary of all the changes we made to your code base for reference. So, and then this is going over a bunch of stuff. So on the API side, your auth provider API passed it to the, yeah. The Node.js change, there was a change to the fetch that's being used. So they're just recommending a switch, another recommended change. Yeah, and then here's the other kind of bigger change right here. And this is the, so by default, originally, one of the few security things RedwoodJS offered was a depth limit for GraphQL queries. So it was set so that it couldn't go more than, you couldn't nest more than 6 fields in. So you couldn't just keep on infinitely requesting more and more data. There was a limit of 6 to avoid, people trying to do a denial of service attack on you by overtaxing your application. All right, so let's see. So this only affects you if you set the depth limit option in the GraphQL handler function and comes applied via code mod or by manually updating the function. Yeah. So this is like, normally if you didn't actually explicitly set it, it would just be set by default. Now that RedwoodJS uses GraphQL Armor, the depth limit option, and the GraphQL handler, create GraphQL handler, where you set the max query depth, is changed to Armor config. There's a code mod to do this for you, or you can do it manually. So this is the simple code mod for that the team created. And then, but it's just doing this right here. It's just changing the config. So that's a call out for a breaking change. Match point is no longer exported from just router. Okay, so it's an undocumented function. Alrighty, so that covers overall the changes that are going on. So let's go ahead and hide this. We don't need this up anymore. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of the documentation stuff. So let's look at GraphQL Armor first. So the official documentation in the Canary docs for GraphQL Armor. So GraphQL Armor configuration. So GraphQL Armor is a middleware that adds a security layer for RedwoodJS GraphQL endpoints configured with sensible defaults. You don't have to configure anything to enforce protection against aliases cost. So alias, cost, depth, directive, token abuse, and GraphQL operations, as well as block field suggestions or revealing error messages that might leak sensitive information. But if you need to enable, disable, to modify the default settings, GraphQL Armor is fully configurable in a per plugin fashion. Simply define and provide a custom GraphQL security configuration to your GraphQL handler. So in your GraphQL handler, you would provide the Armor config. And the Armor config has different keys to modify each plugin, because GraphQL Armor, each one of those security features is a separate plugin that can be modified, turned on, turned off, and then or tweaked. For example, the default max query depth is 6. To change that setting to 2, simply provide the configuration handler. So there you go. So then here are the actual things. So max alias, this protection is enabled by default. Limit the number of aliases in a document, defaults to 15. So then, okay, let's go over the example. So alias allow you rename, so this needs to be some documentation updates need to happen here. So GraphQL Armor, let's go ahead and before we continue on. Let's find the docs. And we'll try to update these as we go along. Where are the docs for this? I'm trying to remember exactly where we put the docs at. Oh, is it right here? Docs. Here we go. And GraphQL. Here we go. So you're making changes of that, suspending the change, will write it to a new branch. Yeah, it's fine. All right, so where are we in here? So we are looking at max alias. Whoa. Here we go. Okay, so this protection, so alias allow you to rename. All right. So alias allows you to rename the data that is returned in a query's results. They manipulate the structure of the query result that is fetched from your service, displaying according to your web component's needs. This contrived example uses 11 aliases. I don't know how. 11 alias to rename a post's ID and title. Post ID and title to various permutations of post, article, and blog to return a different shape in the query result. So yeah, so you could take, you can alias. So when you're fetching a field, you can keep on like prepending it with this type of notation, and this is an alias. So we're aliasing ID as article ID, ID as post ID, and we can just keep on doing a bunch of these aliases to force it to return back even more data, which can cause memory issues and cause your application to crash because you're just fetching too much information. Denial of service. So by default, this sets it to 15, and you can just change it by doing this way. This protection is enabled by default. So cost limit, this protection is enabled. It analyzes incoming GraphQL queries and applies a cost analysis algorithm to prevent resource overload by blocking to expensive requests. I think too expensive. Does that make sense? Like too expensive by blocking too expensive requests. I don't know. I'll leave that as too expensive requests. The cost computation. You see, this is where Grammarly comes into play. Grammarly, where are you? Let's see if you can set me straight. Oh, well, whatever. We'll just leave that as is. The cost computation is quite simple and naive at the moment, but there are plans to make it evolve toward an extensive plugin with many features. So the default is max cost is 5,000. So the cost, so now it's going to talk about how the cost is calculated. So the cost is a factor of the kind of field and depth. Total cost is a cumulative sum of each field based on the type and its depth in the query. So scalar fields, those that return values like strings and numbers, are worth one value, whereas objects are worth another. How deep they are nested in the query is a multiplier of the factor, such that the cost multiplied by the depth multiplied by the depth cost factor. So yeah. So the deeper it is and the larger object, if it's an object, the more it costs. So if the total cost exceeds the max cost, the error stops GraphQL execution, rejects the request. You have control over the field kind and depth cost settings, but the defaults are, so objects cost 2, scalars cost 1, and then the depth cost factor is 1.5. So in this small example, we have one object field me that contains 2 nested scalar fields, ID and me. There is an operation profile, which is neither a scalar nor an object, that's ignored. Yeah, so we're just naming this. So then the cost breakdown is so scalar is 2, or scalar is 1. This is 1, and then this is probably another scalar, or so that's 1. So then, and then the depth is in 1, so we're in 1, so it's 1 times 1.5, 2. Let's see, so the parent object is me, worth 2. So this is an object. So it's a cost of 5. So then the overall max cost limit is 5,000. You can change the default cost limit setting. Yeah. So then you can set all these overrides and how to calculate things. And then again, so this is to prevent someone from requesting too much data, right? Like instead they got around the alias thing. So now they're like, okay, well, I want to only call for fields that are really expensive to fetch to cause your application to crash. So that's the safeguard there. So max depth. So max depth was a feature that had existed in Redwood before, but now it's in Armor. So the depth limit is set to 6. So, and then let's read it through. Attackers often submit expensive nested queries to abuse query depth that could overload your database or expend costly resources. Typically, these types of unbound, complex, and expensive GraphQL queries are usually huge, deeply nested, and take advantage of an understanding of your schema, hence why schema introspection is disabled by default in production, and the data model relationships to create cyclical queries. Yeah, so like, if they know that, you could easily create cyclical queries. Oh, actually, here's the examples right here. So an example of a cyclical query here takes advantage of knowing that and author. So all right. So query take advantage of that. An author has posts, and each post has an author. Each post has an author that has posts. So each author and each post has an author that has posts, and that has an author that, etc. So it's a cyclical thing because you can backwards reference each other. You can just keep on going. So then they can just do this: grab the posts, grab the authors, grab the posts, grab the authors, and just keep on going and going and going and going and going. until your application crash. So this is limited to 8 of doing that. So max directives. This protection is enabled by default, limits the number of directives in a document, defaults to 50. So the following example demonstrates that using the add include, add skip GraphQL query directive, and then by using these directives, you can just make any simple query be computational heavy because you're using these directives. Because if you use a directive, it needs to spend computational time to determine, if it should be included or excluded based off certain criteria. There's other more complex directives that you could add to your GraphQL API, but include and skip are ones that are built in. So this is just an example of avoiding doing that, and it's limited to 50. By limiting the maximum number of directives in document, malicious queries can be rejected, and then max directives enabled, and then how much? By limiting the number, yeah. Need to remember to read this so we don't remember. Oh, looks like the battery's gonna die soon on my camera. Oh no. All right, well, I'll plug it into something in a second because my monitor's not giving enough juice. Let's see, how much do we have to read? Still have a couple more things to go. So actually, let's take a quick little break. And I'm gonna plug in my phone so it doesn't die on stream. So we'll just use this as I'll be right back. BRB. All right, I plugged it into a battery pack instead of the monitor that's not providing enough juice. Hopefully that is good enough. We'll see. All right, so let's keep on going through this and we'll see, hopefully, let's just read it through, see if it all makes sense, and also if we need to fix any typos. So max tokens, this protection is enabled by default, limits the number of GraphQL tokens in a document. In computer science, lexical analysis, lexing, or tokenization is the process of converting sequences of characters into sequences of lexical tokens. Given the following GraphQL operation, so standard query, the tokens are query, this, the curly brace, me, curly brace ID. So having a max of 8 tokens. So given an example, a query with 8 tokens and a custom configuration of 10. Yeah, so this default, so we can set the maximum amount of tokens. So this is kind of like restricting it to, this is almost like restricting it to the length of an application, or the length of a string. You're trying to limit like string length. So this is like the same kind of like same thing, but in terms of like the tokens of parsing. It's lexical analysis is pretty core to like compilers and understanding languages and stuff like that. It's like, it's something actually really interesting to get into. I got into it in college and when I had to do my compilers course. But basically this is how a things are able to detect whether you have the proper syntax, whether you're missing curly braces and stuff like that, is because it's able to break these up into lexical tokens and then double check whether things are balanced, right? So it's like query should be there, you know, like your statement's invalid in terms of if the query token's not the first thing there. If you can't have a right curly brace if the left curly brace isn't there. So you can use these tokens and you can tokenize them and do analysis based off that to determine whether your code is syntactically correct. And also to do even more stuff, but it's an interesting topic. All right, block field suggestions. So this one's an interesting one that I didn't really think about too much until I was doing the research for this work. So this plugin is enabled by default. This will prevent suggesting fields in case of an erroneous request. Suggestions can lead to the leak of your schema, even with disabled introspection, which can be very detrimental in case of a private API. Examples such suggestions. So when you're doing GraphQL stuff, if you misspell a field, it's you might get an error back that says cannot query field star, on type media. Did you mean stats or staff or status? So it's like trying to be helpful and suggesting stuff for you for fields on the media type, which is great. But in terms of a public production API that you don't want people poking around in, to figure out every single little thing in it, disabling the field suggestions prevents them from guessing or easily guessing, because all they have to do is just type in an incorrect portion, and then the API is just going to return back and tell you like, oh hey, did you mean this? And you're like, oh great, now I can look at some additional information that I shouldn't really be looking at, or isn't privy. So you can just outright block that. So if you enable that, it just hides the suggestions. And then you can change how it does that. So error masking is, let's see. I think, is this one part of the GraphQL armor? When error is thrown, the details of the error are leaked to the outside world. The error and its message are returned in response to that, and logs are even returned to the user. You can potentially leak sensitive or other information about your app. Redwood is here to help. Okay, so this is just disabling that. All right, and then everything else is done. So let's go ahead. So we just got a couple typos in there. So let's try to see if we can just commit these changes. It'd be great if I could rename this branch to something different, because they do have a naming convention for this that they do suggest. But I will get to this later, because I'm probably I'm just gonna rename the branch. Could spin off a new branch and rename it. Cool. So that covers the GraphQL armor stuff, and we're helping out by doing a couple little typo finding here and there. Cool. Alrighty. Let's take a look at the custom authentication docs. Let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at what custom. So if Redwood doesn't officially integrate with the auth provider you want to use, you're not out of luck yet. Redwood has an API. So it has an API you can use to integrate your auth provider of choice. There's a little more work to do, but we'll walk you through all that using the end host as an example. Okay, so let's see. I'm really curious about this because just like last Friday, when we were trying to go through it so we can do OAuth with Twitch, we're probably going to be following this to do OAuth with Twitch, but using 4.0. So let's go through it. All right, so Yarn Redwood setup auth custom. This makes all the code modifications it can, but whereas with the other auth providers, all you have to do now is get your keys here. Get your keys here. You have to write some code. Let's work on the website first. Here's most of our time. Here most of our time will be spent in the. All right. We found slightly more typos. So let's see, auth custom. Here we go. Okay, so where did we? Here, let's pop this out. Let's do this little flow here. Work will be spent in the. So pop, fix that. Here's most so let's say here most of our time will be spent in the web source auth ts file. It comes commented to guide us, but we'll get into it here. If you're using TypeScript, scroll past the boilerplate interface for now to get our first task, instantiating the client. Okay, so some boilerplate. So the client. Replace this with the auth service provider client SDK. As the comment says, we need to replace this placeholder client object with an instance of our auth provider client SDK. Since we're using nhost, it's time to navigate to their docs for a brief reading. We'll take a docs. We'll take all the work we have to do reading the docs and grant it here, and cut to the chase setting up nhost client. So nhost has its own client library for communicating. That means we'll have to install nhost website. Let's go to that. Then we'll have to make an account, an application, and its backend URL on your application dashboard. So then this is where we set the web source auth. Okay, Okay, that's it for the client. At this point, you could update our TS interface, but we'll leave that to you and press on with the integrations. Now we have create the use auth hook using the client we just made, so that the rest of Redwood, like the other router, works. Now we have, trying to understand, now we have, I think, have to create using the client we just made, so that the rest of Redwood, like the router, works. Scroll down a little more, create implementation function. Okay, so create an implementation, we take in the client, and then we do the various steps of doing the login, sign up, get token. So we have to, now we have to use auth. Okay, so now we have to create okay. Yeah, and here's all the different steps. So log in, log out, sign up, get token. This may seem like a lot, but actually not. But it's actually not so bad. It's just about mapping the client's functions to these properties, many of which are pretty straightforward. The fact that this is eventually the use auth hook. The fact that this is eventually the use auth hook is hidden a bit. Create gets passed to create authentication, which returns the auth provider component, and use auth hook. But you don't have to concern yourself with that here. Again, let's take a look at all the reading and trial and error you'll have to do for grant. So again, let's take a look at all the reading and trial and error you'll have to do for granted, though it may be long and tedious. So this is lining up. Yeah, okay. So this is lining up with the different, steps that you'd have to follow for the auth provider. And then we're getting short on time, so let's see if we can zip through this. And then next Friday, yeah, so let's just zip through this real quick. So API side, so now that we've set up the website, every GraphQL request includes a token, but without a way to verify and decode that token, the API side doesn't know what to do with it. So let's start there. Say API source lib auth ts, make an empty function auth decoder. Eventually, we'll pass this to the create GraphQL handler function in API source GraphQL. The GraphQL server calls it with two arguments, the token and the type. Both are strings. First, let's make sure that the type is the same type that create auth implementation. So in this case, we're calling the type is custom auth. If it's not, then we'll call it quits. So we're gonna check for the type, and then we're gonna probably decode the token that we get in. So let's verify and decode the token. We'll use the npm module Jose to do that. It has a JWT verify function that does exactly what we want. Go ahead and add it. So workspace, and then we're configuring things. We need the JWT secret so we can unwrap the secret, because this library is driven by JWT. Then we use the auth decoder. So then right here, if it's not that, we go here, and then we encode the secret, and then we use the secret to verify the token, which gives us the decoded information. That should be enough. Now things should just work. Let's make sure if this is a brand new project, generate a homepage. Then we'll try to sign up by destructuring the sign up from the user auth hook. We'll also destructure the display is authenticated to see if it worked. It's authenticated and it is sign up. So then, yeah, so we do the sign up flow through that service. And host doesn't redirect to a hosted sign up page or sign up modal. In a real app, you'd build a form here, but we're going to hard code the email and password. One thing you may want to do before signing up is disable email verification, else you'll actually have to verify your email. Go back to settings and host it again. Alrighty, so nhost is not an OAuth provider. It's like a JWT workflow thing. So it's going to be interesting when we're looking at actually how to do an OAuth provider. I'd imagine Auth0 would be the thing to look at, but this should be an adventure nonetheless that we'll be incorporating instead. All right. I think we got through all the stuff I wanted to get through. This is the custom authentication page again that we just read through. We don't have to worry about that. All righty. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, folks. Thanks so much for hanging out with me as we were going through the RedwoodJS 4.0 release candidate docs and also looking at some error typos. Let's go ahead and commit this change too. And we'll just commit that to the branch. And again, I'm going to rename the branch follow the convention because GitHub automatically generated for this since we were doing this doing the modifications in GitHub itself. So yeah, thanks a lot, folks. Greatly appreciate it. And hopefully you are doing well and hope to see you again in the next stream next Friday. And we'll get back into doing actual coding. So we'll take the the 4.0 release candidate and try to get the application upgraded to be 4.0 compatible, and try to see if we can integrate OAuth into it, specifically log in with Twitch. So that will be interesting. Don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to figure out how. All right. So I'll see you in the next one, folks. Peace.